The term on meta comes from gaming, and when I say on meta in the context of fiction, I'm kind of talking about the niche of progression fantasy, litRPG, isekai, and other new genres in sci-fi and fantasy. Ground zero for these terms is probably the web serial site Royal Road, but there's also a really healthy community on Amazon, Kindle, and Reddit. Lately, there's been kind of a schism between writers who write on meta and writers who write off meta. Off meta is generally considered to be general sci-fi and fantasy, older styles, I would suppose. By older, I mean 1990s, early 2000s. But it really just means writers who are kind of bucking the trend or not writing to trend, not writing what's popular, not writing to market, purposely writing their own thing. And that's fine if you are not looking to become famous or you're not looking for success, but of course a lot of writers are. Some writers come into the industry unaware that there is on meta, off meta, that trends matter, that tropes matter, that tags matter on Amazon and other booksellers. And they become frustrated when they realize that the fact that they are writing for themselves or writing what they grew up with is no longer considered new, or it doesn't grip audiences in the same way, or it's too cross-genre to sell easily. There's a million reasons why something doesn't catch on and doesn't sell well. I think anyone like me who's been around for more than a few decades has kind of noticed that there's a homogeneity in our culture where even when you go to Comic-Cons, the artists are no longer selling very unique stuff. They're selling IP, licensed IP. So in other words, Marvel characters, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, like things that are already very, very popular, and they have trouble selling their own original works. I think there are a million reasons for this. We could argue if it's audience driven, if it's driven by the markets, but I think it's kind of undeniable that this is a phenomenon that's happening. So the question becomes, do you write on meta? Do you write off meta, and why? Why would you purposely turn your back on a technique or a tactic for gaining more readers, gaining more visibility? And I think that if you do pay attention to this industry, that is undeniably what this is. It is a tactic for gaining readers, being on meta, writing to trend, writing to trope, writing to market, as they say. When you write in a category that is popular, that has upward momentum, you're more likely to get noticed. Some writers embrace this wholeheartedly and they do write to market, and that is all they do, or they use that to fund their unique personal writing. Other writers only write from the heart or only write what they want to read, and that's not always what is the most popular thing, and it doesn't always sell that well. It doesn't always gain visibility. When I say sell and when I say visibility, I'm using these kind of interchangeably because they matter. Like, visibility matters to your sales. There's no denying it. You could have the most brilliant book in the universe, and if nobody ever sees it, if it's online and it just drops into obscurity, then it's not going to sell very well. Trends do matter for visibility. So for me personally, I've always wanted to be a best-selling author. So why exactly am I not writing on meta? Well, when I wrote my first big series, which was the Torth series, 6 books, a million words, I did not even know what on meta meant. I did not understand why popularity mattered to visibility. I say that Torth is sci-fi progression fantasy, but that is kind of by accident. I believe I've always been drawn to heroic fantasy, which is power progression, and Torth has some elements of superhero. It's got a lot of elements of galactic empire building and all of that. I wrote all of that before I'd even heard of Royal Road, and I didn't understand that I was writing off meta, of course, when I first wrote it. It was much later that I serialized it on Royal Road after I had already completed the entire series. So that was off meta by accident, and I did learn a few things from that experience. One of the things I learned was that multi-point of view doesn't do as well as single point of view. The audiences on Royal Road and any kind of big binge reading voracious sci-fi fantasy audiences, they tend to like a character that grabs them right away. Multi-point of view, you're switching between multiple characters, and there's a little bit of a gamble each time. The audience doesn't know if they're going to be attached to that next character, and sometimes they're not. Now, I stand by the Torth series. I think it does well as multi-point of view, but for my current series in progress, which is a fantasy series, temporarily titled Magitechnocracy, for this new series of mine, I'm making it single point of view. I decided to write a little more on meta for that and take that gamble. Another thing that I learned from the Torth series is that dark slogs, otherwise known as misery porn, are no longer in vogue. I think readers were more likely to enjoy those in the 1990s and the early 2000s, which was kind of when I was growing up reading a lot of things. Writers and readers from that era are a lot more tolerant of slogs of the character suffering, undergoing torture or slavery, or just kind of being beaten down before they rise back up and win. I think there is still a hungry audience for those type of stories, but they don't generally do as well in heroic power progression fantasy circles and isekai and all that. A lot of those audiences are looking for just fun escapism. And I kind of learned that the hard way. I've read a lot, and I can see why it is much more appealing to have a character that wins a lot, setups and payoff. So it's like a quick setup, a quick payoff, quick setup, quick payoff, and it becomes very addictive. So with my new series, I'm also edging into that territory to see how that does. Now, I thought about writing fully on meta and going for litRPG or isekai. And it turned out I just couldn't quite bring myself to do that. Those are not the genres that I love the most. I can respect them, and there are certainly examples that I think are great. I mean, I love Dungeon Crawl as much as anyone else. But when I write and when I read, I like innovative and new things, and I find that that's, in my mind, already becoming played out. Now, of course, to the mainstream audience, most of them haven't discovered it yet, so it's not played out by any means in the mainstream, and I'm not going to, discredit anybody's tastes. However, for me, it's just, I want a magic system that's clever, and so in this new series I'm writing, I have two competing magic systems. The main character has kind of substituted algebraic geometry for things that he found in an ancient magic book, and he created his own magic system. So I've got that going on, and then I have a decrepit evil empire, which is using another kind of magic system. And after a lot of thought, I decided to make it a little bit of a litRPG satire, where the system is very much like a D&D game. You get points, there's an adventurer's guild, but overall the system is corrupt and resource hungry. So they sacrifice elves, mermaids, unicorns to keep their power grid going. It's a little bit of a satire of our own world in a lot of ways. I especially wanted to make fun of the US healthcare system because I find that just the decrepit system we have needs a little bit of poking fun at. So I'm writing the story that I'm passionate about, that I'm excited to write, that I can't wait to explore a deep dive into all these different explorations of our own society through the lens of fantasy. And it is not just a straight up fun adventure that's kind of a derivative copy of another fun adventure. As a writer and as a creative person, I've never liked doing very derivative stuff. Like, I actually left the video game industry because I got tired of working on, SpongeBob game number 5. It's not anything against SpongeBob or SpongeBob lovers. It's just that I don't want to spend my entire life building other people's dreams. I have my own. And I have my own things that I want to write about and explore, and I believe they're new. They're innovative and all of that. Now, does anyone see them? Am I turning my back on lots and lots of profit? Possibly. There are exceptions, I believe, that take off despite all the odds, but those are extremely rare. They're 1 in a million, and I have learned that it's right place, right time, and so many other factors. In other words, the big success stories, I believe, are not just the fact that they're on meta. Sometimes they're on meta by accident. I believe that happens as well. But on top of that, of course, great writing, great storytelling, addictive stuff. There's a luck factor where they intersect with kind of the popular cultural zeitgeist at the time. And then on top of all of that, you have an author who's opportunistic and takes advantage of every lucky break that comes their way. And they engage with reader comments. They're, very gracious to readers and so forth. So there's a zillion factors even on top of those involved in, the big runaway success stories. And to be honest, that's why I'm not envious of on-meta writers who do meet with success. It's honestly not all of them, it's very few of them. Now, have I ever felt professional envy? Yes. I think most writers who've been doing this for more than a few years have some of that. Even those who just started out might have some. I think we all see runaway successes that we don't understand why they became a success. That happens. For me personally, the ones I see that are runaway successes that I don't like or don't understand, I can usually see at least a little glimmer of something where there's some kind of addictive quality to it that doesn't work for me, but I can see why it works for someone else. As far as professional envy goes, I felt more of it when I was aiming for mainstream Big Five publishing. I still believe to this day that the gatekeepers in that industry are chasing trends and are making kind of poor decisions about which authors they back. They believe that these are going to be the runaway successes, but I'm noticing, and I think others are noticing, that some of their big successes started out as indie, and I think there's a reason for that. And I'm not talking about the Hugo winners and the Nebula winners, I'm talking about their big sellers. So after going through that ringer, I was actually kind of surprised to not feel much envy when I saw Matt Dinniman's career take off. That was kind of recently. Him and a few others. I feel like I've seen these authors take success by the horns, and they do things like they're very opportunistic. They grab the opportunities they get. And in some cases, like with Dungeon Crawler Carl, I wonder if I would even be able to handle the ravening crowds that guy gets. Might be a little bit intimidating. So in other words, with these big indie success stories, I don't see them as coasting on their luck or resting on their laurels. I think that they are genuinely hardworking go-getters. They've been generally working behind the scenes for years to try to become famous. Now, they are not the only ones by any chance. They are the tip of the iceberg. There are people that work very, very hard for years and never see success and die trying, and I've also seen plenty of that behind the scenes. So it's not like hard work equals success in this case. It just doesn't. There is the luck factor, and I've had to learn that the hard way. I didn't want to learn it, but it is the truth. All the same, I don't feel much envy for somebody who's worked that hard, and usually they're grateful because they do understand the luck that they had, the lucky breaks. They see it. Now, particularly in the case of Dungeon Crawler Carl, I feel like Matt Dinniman cares about quality. You can kind of see that with his choice of audiobook narrator and cover artist. And it's nice to see a breath of fresh air like that take off and go mainstream fully. So I'm cheering him on, and to my great shock, I don't really feel envy for his career. And I think it's fully deserved. So why are some authors, especially web serial authors, kind of envious or jealous of on-meta success? I think one obvious answer is that it's easier to get visibility by, some small margin. And from the perspective of someone who's giving it their all, trying their hardest, trying to win the Olympics, basically, it's very frustrating to see someone else win, so to speak, with not as much effort as that person's putting in. And then, of course, the on-meta authors who did see the success are like, why are you so jealous, bro? I'm doing, you could do what I'm doing. Why aren't you? So I can kind of see both sides of the argument here. To the on-meta authors, it looks like the off-meta authors are having sour grapes and playing the game on hard mode. And they're just wondering, why are you so bitter? Why don't you just do the easy thing like I did and write to market? And of course, the answer in a lot of ways is that most of the off-meta authors are not inspired by litRPG or by the things that the on-meta authors really love. That's not 100% their cup of tea. They got into writing for some other reason, and they're seeking any way possible to get an audience. And of course, one of the big ways is to write a web serial and gain an audience that way, and so they're seeking any path they can. In a bygone era, they would have been querying literary agents, and maybe some of them already tried that route. But, the mainstream industry has changed in huge ways. They're not 100% looking for heroic, epic fantasy and sci-fi anymore. In fact, hard sci-fi, that whole industry is almost dying in many ways in mainstream. And so these authors who love those genres, they want to write more, they want to read more of it. They're seeking any path they can towards publishing their own magnum opus or passion project, and they end up in the web serial world or places where litRPG and other kind of niche, innovative genres are popular. But they're not there to copy what all the other authors are doing. They're not there to write to market and just have fun and gain an audience. They're there to tell their particular story. Now, ideally, of course, there would be a platform that would serve the mainstream type of older sci-fi fantasy reader, sort of like how Tor books and doll books were in the 1990s. There's authors and readers who still want that, but it doesn't quite exist anywhere. Now, Wattpad and Royal Road and places like that are sort of grassroots movements, but they are made for and created by, a newer generation of readers who want their own thing that has their own vibes, their own earmarks. They are not 100% one-to-one a rebrand of the heroic fantasy of the 1990s from Tor books. it's a new thing. And the people who are looking for like a new version of the Wheel of Time don't necessarily like that or want that. They're looking for, the Wheel of Time or Game of Thrones or something like that. There's no easy place for those kind of epics to take off anymore. I mean, the world has changed. And we could, discuss why Royal Road and Wattpad are the only places and why we don't have a place for another Game of Thrones. I think, to be honest, like, a lot of stars had to align for these platforms to even survive. There are so many that failed. And they've clung to life for, over a decade each and survived tons of trials and tribulations. So the fact that we even have these platforms is a little bit of a fluke and a miracle. For better or worse, that's what we have. Some writers are angry about it. Some readers are angry about it. Yeah, I'm a little upset that we're not having another Wheel of Time or Game of Thrones. I wish there was room for that in the industry. I think there should be. It'd be nice to see another Lord of the Rings. I don't mean derivative, like exactly a copy of Lord of the Rings, of course. I never mean that. I mean something completely new that changes the whole industry in the same way that Tolkien is the father of modern fantasy. I believe there's room for something like that to come again. But in the current environment, the current paradigm, where everything's about trend chasing, I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. And that is, in my opinion, a little bit of a loss for the whole industry. On the other hand, it is the reality we live in. I think there's a lot of creative people and dreamers that have not quite adjusted to that new reality and are kind of mourning the loss of what could have been and all that. So what do I think of fiction that is squarely on meta, that's hitting the tropes and the trends? Some of it I do like. Some of it I believe is popular for a reason. I personally don't like comp titles. I personally don't like things that are very derivative of something else. If it's like exactly like X, but with one little tiny tweak, I'm not into it. The things that are full of inside jokes or very obvious tropes played straight, I don't go for. If it's paint by numbers kind of fiction, not into it. However, I'm not going to judge people who do love that stuff. For one thing, I've been around for a while and I read 50 to 70 books per year, which is a lot for most people compared to most. So I feel like I've probably seen more than most people have, and I'm more picky, I'm more judgmental and all that. Whereas someone who's a newer reader, someone who's much younger, to them it's all new. So who am I to judge how they come at this fiction? Every reader brings their own background, their own baggage, as they say. And I'm not going to judge somebody who is coming from a different perspective. Like as I said earlier, litRPG itself is a new thing when you look at the wider industry. Now it's very much on meta in the web serial world of Royal Road. But in the larger fantasy industry, it's a brand new thing. There's still innovation to be had there. I mean, there are still kind of wacky new ideas being thrown at the wall everywhere, and that's fun to see. I like that. And not just with litRPG, of course, but with superhero fiction and isekai and other subgenres like that. There's so much new going on, and in many ways, that's wonderful. Now I'm going to say most of the new stuff I see is in the indie sphere, and that's why I read almost all exclusively indie books now. But it's still happening, and that's wonderful. Overall, when I see an author get kind of derisive about trope stuff, on meta stuff, I think it does not serve them well. I do understand where they're coming from. I felt those bitter feelings myself. However, the things that people love, it's like dearly held beliefs. And so you're kind of attacking somebody's core identity in some cases. There are writers who write this stuff and it is their core identity. Attacking someone's deeply held core beliefs, never a good idea. And of course, writing full time, it's more than just a job to most authors. It's a passion career. So just don't attack that. It's just not a good idea. It leads to bad blood. I would say just take a step back and think about how you reacted to that genre when you were 15 years old or 20 or however it was when you first came to whatever genre you love. And how would you feel if someone attacked that? I mean, as they say, tastes are subjective and they vary widely. So why don't I chase trends? Why am I not writing on meta? For one thing, one angle that I think some people need to think about is that chasing algorithms, hitting the right keywords, getting into the right categories and all that, it is a tactic and it's likely to become harder and harder. For one thing, people are going to be using AI more to kind of pump out more generic stuff and flood the market with that. So standing out from that crowd is likely to become harder. And on top of that, there's a lot of successful indie authors who are doing exactly that. and then giving out kind of guru advice and workshops telling other people to do it. So the vast majority of writers are writing to trend and very much trying to do the rapid release tactic, the right to market tactic. And it works for now. It may continue to work, but I do believe that standing out that way is only going to get harder, not easier. I think those tactics do work for people who love and live and breathe tropes and kind of comp titles and derivative stuff. And if you do love those things, then it's very much a valid tactic and you should do it. However, for me, that's not why I write. That's not why I became a storyteller. Being a creative person and a storyteller was never just a job for me, and I never want it to become a chore or something where I'm like kind of forcing myself to do it. To me, the marketing part is already kind of a chore and difficult to do, and I never want that to carry over into the writing part. And of course, if it is just a chore, why am I even writing? There's easier ways to make money, so we get back into that old argument, and it's not for me. Being creative and innovative is the fun part. Brainstorming new ideas is the fun part for me. So I'm not going to be ruining that anytime soon. And I do hope more authors take that approach and stay creative and innovative and be off the wall, weird, and original. And, if it means turning your back on potential monetary gain, how many of us are really in this just for the money? So happy writing. That's all I have to say on the subject.